Did you know that the scariest part of Night of the Demon was never supposed to be in the movie at all? The giant monster that terrified audiences in 1957 was added without the director's permission, and he was furious. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about Night of the Demon. Number 20. A director who hated his own monster here is something most people never talk about when they sit down to watch Night of the Demon. The man who made this film, a brilliant director named Jacques Tourneur, did not want you to see that demon. Not even for 1 second. He fought hard to keep it hidden. He believed that the scariest things in horror are always the ones you cannot see. He had proven that idea before, back in the 1940s, when he made films like Cat People and I Walked with a Zombie for the legendary producer Val Lewton. In those movies, the monster was always suggested, always hiding in shadows, always just around the corner. Your imagination did all the hard work, and that made the fear feel personal and real. Tourneur carried that same belief into Night of the Demon. He planned the entire movie so that the demon would remain invisible, a dark force that you felt but never saw clearly. He wanted the audience to lean forward in their seats, their hearts pounding, their minds painting pictures that no camera could ever capture. But the producers had a different idea. They were worried. They thought audiences in 1957 wanted something bigger, something bold, something they could actually look at and scream about. So without telling Tourneur, they hired a team to build a full creature costume and shoot extra scenes. Those scenes were added to the beginning and end of the film, putting the demon right there on screen in full view for everyone to see. Tourneur finally watched the finished movie. He was deeply upset. He felt that the mystery had been stolen from him. He believed the producers had broken something precious. And yet, here's the strange twist. Audiences loved the monster. They screamed, they laughed nervously, they talked about it for years. What Tourneur saw as a wound became the movie's most remembered moment. Sometimes the thing you fight hardest against becomes the thing that makes you famous. What he hated most, the world loved best. Number 19. The story behind The Story Before Night of the Demon became a movie. It was a short story. A very old short story written by a man named Montague Rhodes James. He was a scholar, a quiet and careful man who loved old books and dusty libraries. He wrote ghost stories as a kind of hobby, sharing them with friends at Christmas gatherings in Cambridge, England. His story was called Casting the Runes. In that story, a man named Carswell uses a piece of ancient parchment covered in runic symbols to curse people. The curse works like a timer. Once you receive the runes, the demon begins moving toward you, counting down the days until it arrives to kill you. Only way to survive is to pass the runes back to the person who gave them. It is a simple idea, but James wrote it with such quiet detail and such careful dread that it felt completely real. When the screenwriter Charles Bennett sat down to adapt this story for the screen in the 1950s, he had a big challenge. A short story does not have enough material for a full movie. So Bennett expanded everything. He added a main character named John Holden, an American psychologist who does not believe in the supernatural. He added scenes, conversations, and confrontations. He built a world around the curse that James had only hinted at. Unquiet Man's Christmas Story became a horror classic. Old words became new nightmares. Number 18. Dana Andrews and the American Skeptic. The character in Night of the Demon is a man named John Holden, and he is played by an American actor named Dana Andrews. Holden is a psychologist. He is smart, educated, and completely certain that there is no such thing as magic or demons. He comes to England to investigate a cult leader named Julian Carswell, and from the very beginning he refuses to believe anything strange is happening. Dana Andrews was a very well-known actor in the 1940s and 50s. He had starred in big Hollywood films like Laura and The Best Years of Our Lives. He was handsome, serious, and very good at playing men who were confident and in control. But by the time he made Night of the Demon, his career had slowed down a little. He was looking for interesting roles, and John Holden offered him something different. He is not a hero in the traditional sense. He is stubborn and difficult. He ignores warnings. He refuses to open his mind. And that stubbornness puts everyone around him in danger. Andrews played all of that with quiet intensity. He made Holden feel genuinely real. not a cartoon villain, and not a noble hero, just a flawed human being who thought he knew everything. There is one scene in the film where Holden is handed the cursed parchment and he does not even realize what it means. Andrews plays that moment with such ordinary confidence that it feels genuinely chilling. He is not afraid because he does not understand that he should be. That was not just good acting. That was a perfectly written and perfectly performed moment of human blindness. Confidence was really the beginning of doom. Number 17. Niall McGinnis, and the villain who stole the movie. If Dana Andrews is the brain of Night of the Demon, then Niall McGinnis is its beating, unpredictable heart. McGinnis plays Julian Carswell, the cult leader and main villain of the story. And here's the thing that surprises most people when they first watch this film. Carswell is not scary in the way you expect a villain to be. He is not cold or cruel. He is funny. He is warm. But underneath all of that warmth is something deeply dangerous. He is a man who will send a demon to kill you if you threaten his work. McGinnis walked a very thin line in playing this character. He had to be likable enough that audiences felt confused about him, but threatening enough that the danger always felt real. He pulled it off completely. Many people who watch the film come away talking about Carswell more than anyone else. He feels like a real person, not a movie monster. He has a mother who loves him. He has a sense of humor. He has genuine passion for what he believes in. And that is exactly what makes him terrifying. Real danger does not always wear a dark cloak. Sometimes it serves birthday cake. McGinnis gave the film its soul, and he did it by making a monster feel human. Number 16. Filming in England with an American touch. Night of the Demon was made in England, but it had a very American feeling to it. This happened because the film was a co-production between a British company and an American company. The British company was Sabre Film Productions, and the American company was Columbia Pictures. Both sides wanted the movie to appeal to their own audiences. Columbia Pictures wanted a recognizable American star at the center, which is why Dana Andrews was cast. They also wanted the story to feel modern and exciting, not too dark or too slow. The British team, on the other hand, brought the atmosphere. They knew English landscapes, English country houses, and English forests. They understood how to use those settings to create dread. The result was a movie that felt like two worlds meeting in the middle. You had the clean, rational American perspective represented by Andrews, and you had the older, stranger, more mysterious British world pressing in around him from every direction. The filming took place at real locations around England, including parts of Borehamwood and the famous Black Park, a large wooded area in Buckinghamshire that has been used in hundreds of British films over the decades. The forests in the movie feel genuinely old and watching, because they are genuinely old and watching. You cannot fake that kind of atmosphere. The trees remember things, and the camera caught every shadow they held. Two worlds made one film, and the tension between them made the story stronger. Number 14. The Carswell House and its real location. One of the most memorable settings in Night of the Demon is the home of Julian Carswell. It is a grand, beautiful country estate surrounded by wide lawns and old trees. It feels like a place where something has been living for a very long time, something that watches visitors arrive and knows more about them than they know about themselves. For the exterior shots of the house, the filmmakers used a real English country estate. This kind of location scouting was very common in British filmmaking of that era. Studios did not have the budget to build elaborate exterior sets, so they found real places that matched what the story needed. The interior scenes were filmed on sets built at the studio. But those sets were designed to match the feeling of the real exterior, grand, old, slightly overwhelming. The contrast between the beautiful house and the dark events happening inside it was very deliberate. Carswell lives in a place of culture and refinement. He has books, art, and fine furniture. He is not living in a cave or a dungeon. He is living in the kind of house that respectable, educated people live in. And that contrast is deeply unsettling. Horror that hides behind beauty is the most dangerous kind. The filmmakers used location and set design to say something important. Evil is not always ugly. Sometimes it has the best taste in the room. What looked like a home felt like a trap. Number 13. The seance scene and real tension on set there is a seance scene in Night of the Demon that many viewers remember long after the film ends. In this scene, characters attempt to communicate with the spirit world, and things quickly go wrong. The atmosphere in the room becomes thick and electric, and you can feel that something is pressing in from outside the normal world. What most people do not know is that the filming of this scene created real tension on the set. Not supernatural tension, but very human tension. Actors and crew members had different opinions about how the scene should be played. Some felt it should be slow and quiet, building dread gradually. Others thought it needed more energy, more visible fear. The director had his own vision, but production pressures meant that compromises were made. The result was a scene that feels slightly uneven to careful viewers, but that unevenness actually adds to the effect. Real seances, if you have ever read descriptions of them, are rarely smooth and calm. They are awkward and uncomfortable, full of silence and then sudden noise. The scene in the film captures that real awkwardness without meaning to, because the people making it were themselves slightly uncomfortable and uncertain. The camera picked up on that. It always does. Film is a strange and honest medium. It records what you plan, but it also records what you feel. And what the cast and crew felt during that scene was genuine unease. That wasn't just performance. That was something real finding its way into the frame. Number 12. Jacques Tourneur's Shadow Legacy. Jacques Tourneur is not a name most casual moviegoers know today, but among film historians and horror lovers, he is considered one of the true masters of atmosphere and shadow. Born in Paris in 1904, he was the son of a filmmaker and grew up surrounded by movies. He moved to Hollywood and worked his way up from editing rooms to directing. His greatest work came in the early 1940s when he collaborated with producer Val Lewton on a series of low-budget horror films that changed what horror could be. Those films, Cat People, I Walked with a Zombie, The Leopard Man, were made with almost no money. They could not afford big monsters or elaborate special effects. So Tourneur used darkness, sound, suggestion, and silence. He let your imagination do the heavy lifting. He trusted the audience to be afraid of what they could not see. That philosophy ran deep in everything he made. When he came to Night of the Demon more than a decade later, he brought all of that experience with him. Every shadow in the film is placed with purpose. Every moment of quiet is designed to make the next sound hit harder. Every landscape is chosen to feel slightly wrong, slightly too old, slightly too aware. Tourneur was a painter who worked in fear. And even with the unwanted monster added to his film, his fingerprints are on every frame. He made audiences feel something rare in horror, not just fear, but wonder, not just dread, but curiosity. Number 10. The demon costume and the men inside it. The creature that appears at the beginning and end of Night of the Demon is a large, horned, clawed beast that looks like it stepped out of an ancient woodcut illustration. It moves strangely, with a combination of rigid power and almost dreamlike slowness. When audiences first saw it in 1957, reactions were very strong. Some people found it ridiculous. Others found it deeply frightening. Most found it unforgettable. Building and operating the demon costume was a major undertaking for the effects team. The creature was created using a combination of a large physical costume and wirework to create the illusion of massive size and supernatural movement. The men who wore and operated the costume during filming had a physically demanding job. The costume was heavy, hot, and difficult to move in. Visibility inside it was very limited. The actors operating it had to trust the directions being called out to them because they could barely see where they were going. The perfect demon on screen accidentally captured that wrongness. What looked like a mistake felt like truth. Number 9. The music that breathed life into Fear A horror film without the right music is like a haunted house with all the lights on. You can see the shapes, but you cannot feel the dread. It had to suggest the presence of something that the camera could not always show. His score for the film uses strings, brass, and percussion in ways that feel both classical and deeply unsettling. There are moments in the film where the music does something very clever. It begins to build and build, leading you toward what feels like a climax, and then it suddenly drops into silence. That silence hits harder than any loud note could. Your nervous system has been prepared for impact, and instead of the impact, you get emptiness. That emptiness is where fear lives. Parker also used specific musical motifs that appear whenever the demon or the curse is referenced. These motifs are short and simple, but they sink into your memory quickly. By the end of the film, you have heard them enough times that they trigger a physical response, a slight tightening of the chest, a quickening of the pulse. That is not accidental. That is a composer who understood how music works on the human body, not just the human mind. The music did not accompany the fear. The music was the fear. Number 8. The British Censors and the Battle Over Content. In 1957, the British Board of Film Censors, known as the BBFC, had very specific rules about what could and could not appear in movies. Horror films were watched very carefully. Violence, supernatural content, and anything that seemed to glorify the occult was treated with great suspicion. Night of the Demon had to navigate these restrictions carefully. The film deals directly with Satanism, ritual curses, and a genuine supernatural creature. These were exactly the kinds of subjects that made the censors nervous. The filmmakers had to frame the story in a way that did not appear to celebrate or endorse what Carswell was doing. The main character's skepticism actually helped with this. Because Holden spends most of the film refusing to believe in the supernatural, the film could argue that it was not promoting occultism, it was simply exploring it from a rational perspective. The ending, in which the demon kills Carswell, also helped. The villain is punished. The dark powers he used turn against him. This moral resolution was exactly the kind of conclusion that made censors more comfortable. But the process of getting approval was still slow and required several conversations between the production team and the censors. Scenes were reviewed, adjustments were discussed, and language was checked carefully. The film that audiences eventually saw was shaped, in small but real ways, those conversations. Content restrictions do not just limit films. Sometimes they force filmmakers to be more creative. What cannot be shown directly must be suggested more cleverly. And cleverness in horror is always more frightening than bluntness. Number 7. The real world of occult research behind the script Night of the Demon is not just a made-up story about a made-up curse. The screenplay draws on a real tradition of occult research and writing that was very active in Britain in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Screenwriter Charles Bennett and the original author Montague Rhodes James were both well aware of figures like Aleister Crowley, a real British occultist who called himself the Great Beast and was famous across Europe for his writings on ritual magic. The idea of using runic symbols to curse enemies is connected to real historical practices from Norse and Germanic traditions. The concept of a demon bound to do the bidding of a human sorcerer appears in real medieval magical texts called grimoires, which were books of spells and rituals used by actual practitioners. Carswell in the film is very clearly modeled on figures from this real history of British occultism. He is educated, sophisticated, and completely sincere in his beliefs. He is not a fraud. He has real power, and he knows exactly how to use it. By grounding the villain in real historical tradition, the writers gave the film a weight that purely invented mythology could never achieve. When Carswell talks about the old ways, you believe him because the old ways are real. They have real books, real histories, real names. The film walks right up to that real darkness and looks into it. And what looks back is not entirely fictional. History is the scariest source of all. Number 5. The film's 2 titles and 2 different versions here is something that confuses many people who are discovering Night of the Demon for the first time. The film actually has two different titles and two slightly different versions. In the United Kingdom, the film was released under the title Night of the Demon. In the United States, it was released under the title Curse of the Demon. And the American version was not just a rename, it was actually a shorter film. Columbia Pictures prepared the American release. They cut approximately 13 minutes from the running time. The film that British audiences saw in 1957 was about 95 minutes long. American audiences saw a version that ran closer to 82 minutes. The cuts were made for several reasons. American distributors wanted a tighter, faster-paced movie. Some scenes that American executives felt slowed the story down were removed. These included character development moments that helped establish the relationships and backstory more fully. The result was two movies that tell the same story but feel slightly different in pacing and depth. Film historians and fans of the movie strongly prefer the longer British version, which gives the characters more room to breathe and the atmosphere more time to build. The shorter American version moves faster but loses some of the texture that makes the film special. Today, when people watch Night of the Demon on home video or streaming platforms, they can usually find both versions, and the difference is genuinely interesting to experience. Same story, two different feelings. One ending, two different journeys to get there. Number 4. The influence on modern horror. Night of the Demon is not just a good old horror film. It is a film that changed the shape of horror storytelling for decades after it was made. Its influence can be seen in movies, books, and television shows that most people watch regularly today without realizing where those ideas came from. The concept of a curse that travels from person to person, a supernatural threat that works like a countdown clock, and the idea that the only way to survive is to pass the danger on to someone else, these ideas all trace a direct line back to Night of the Demon and the Montague Rhodes James story it was based on. The Japanese horror film Ringo from 1998 and its American remake The Ring from 2002 are the most famous examples of this influence. In those films, a cursed videotape kills everyone who watches it, unless they copy the tape and show it to someone else. The mechanism is almost identical to the cursed runes in Night of the Demon. Directors and screenwriters have openly acknowledged the connection. John Carpenter, one of the greatest horror directors in American film history, has spoken about Night of the Demon as one of the films that shaped his understanding of what horror could do. Sam Raimi, George Romero, and many others have pointed to Tourneur's work as a foundational influence. Every time you watch a horror movie about a curse that spreads from person to person, you are watching the echo of a 1957 British film about runes and a demon in the dark. Old seeds grow very tall trees. Number 3. The deleted scenes and the lost vision. When Tourneur made Night of the Demon, he shot more material than ended up in the final film. This is very common in filmmaking. Directors capture more than they need, and the editing process shapes the final story. But in the case of Night of the Demon, the editing process was particularly painful because it was not done by Tourneur himself. The producers controlled the final cut. And when they made the decision to add the demon footage, they also made other decisions about pacing and content that moved the film away from Tourneur's original vision. Some scenes that Tourneur felt were essential, moments of quiet dread, careful character building, and atmosphere without explanation, were shortened or removed to make room for the added monster content and to keep the running time manageable. The result is a film with occasional gaps in logic and pacing that feel slightly unusual. Careful viewers will notice moments where a character seems to know something they were not clearly shown learning, or where a transition between scenes feels slightly abrupt. These are the fingerprints of a film that was reshaped after its creator finished it. What Tourneur's complete vision looked like, we can only imagine. The deleted scenes are gone. They were not preserved, as was common for films of that era when preservation was not a priority. What we have is a magnificent fragment of something even more magnificent. And that partial vision is still good enough to be considered a classic. Sometimes, even an incomplete masterpiece teaches us everything. Number 2. The Legacy and Critical Redemption. When Night of the Demon was first released in 1957, the critical response was mixed. Some reviewers praised the atmosphere and the performances. Others focused on what they saw as the silliness of the visible monster. The film did well enough at the box office, but it was not considered a major artistic achievement at the time. It was a horror film. It played its run. People moved on. But something interesting happened over the following decades. As horror films evolved and horror became a subject of serious academic and critical study, people began going back and looking at older films more carefully. And when they went back to Night of the Demon, they found something they had not expected. They found a film that was genuinely intelligent, genuinely atmospheric, and genuinely ahead of its time. Film critics who specialized in horror began writing about it seriously. It was included in lists of the greatest British horror films ever made. The British Film Institute recognized its importance as part of British cinematic heritage. Universities began teaching it in film courses as an example of how to create tension without relying on gore or cheap shock tactics. Today, Night of the Demon is considered a canonical work of horror cinema. It is the kind of film that filmmakers study, not just enjoy. Its reputation has grown every decade since its release. The world caught up to it, and now it stands exactly where it deserves to stand, not on the edges of horror history, but right at the center of it. Time gave it the respect it always deserved. Number 1. The Demon Reveal and Why It Terrified a Generation. We have arrived at the number 1 fact, the most powerful, most debated, most discussed element of Night of the Demon. The Demon Reveal, the moment at the very end of the film when the cursed parchment finds its way back to Carswell on the train tracks, and the demon comes for him in the darkness. This sequence was added by the producers against Tourneur's wishes, and it became the most famous moment in the entire film. Here is why it worked. Despite everything, the demon appears in darkness, lit by the train's headlights and by an internal glow that makes it look almost radioactive with menace. It moves toward Carswell with horrible certainty. It is enormous, and it is focused entirely on him. And Carswell, who has been charming and warm and human throughout the entire film, is suddenly small and helpless and completely terrified. Niall McGuinness had been so likable as Carswell that this final scene creates an almost unbearable emotional complexity. You have spent the film learning to like him, or at least to understand him. And now you are watching him die. The demon tears him apart off-screen, mercifully, but the before and after are enough. The last image of Carswell, running and screaming as the demon closes in, is one that viewers in 1957 described as genuinely traumatic. Children who saw it as part of Saturday matinees reported nightmares for weeks. Adults described it as one of the most frightening things they had ever seen in a cinema. Tourneur hated the scene, but it burned itself into the memory of an entire generation. Sometimes the thing made against the artist's will becomes the thing that keeps the art alive. That was not just a horror ending. That was a moment that changed how people felt about the dark. Bonus fact, the hidden homage, and the runes that were real. Here is a secret that very few people talk about, even among dedicated fans of Night of the Demon. When the production team designed the runic parchment that appears throughout the film, they did not invent the symbols. They consulted real sources. The runes on the cursed parchment in the movie are based on actual historical runic systems, specifically a combination of Elder Futhark and later medieval variations that were used in real manuscripts and grimoires preserved in British Museum collections. The production designer who created the prop did research in real libraries and looked at real examples of historical occult manuscripts. This was not common practice for horror film props of that era. Most productions simply made up symbols that looked vaguely mysterious. The decision to use real runes was a small one, made quietly without any announcement or publicity. The producers did not mention it. The marketing materials did not reference it. Most of the cast did not even know. But the choice had an effect. People who saw the film and happened to know anything about runic traditions sometimes recognized elements of what they were seeing on screen. That recognition created a special kind of chill, not the chill of fiction, but the chill of something real. Actors who held the parchment prop on set have described feeling an unusual weight to it, though of course that was imagination. Props are props. Paper is paper. But the difference between a symbol you invented and a symbol that humans have been using to call upon dark forces for nearly 2,000 years is not nothing. Real history has a gravity to it, and the filmmakers, knowingly or not, tapped into that gravity when they chose authenticity over invention. Old symbols, new screen. Old darkness, new fear. Ancient tools made one small film feel like it was touching something that had always been there. Night of the Demon is more than a horror film about a monster in the dark. It is a story about belief. About what happens when a rational, educated, confident human being is forced to confront something that refuses to fit inside his understanding of the world. John Holden thinks he knows how reality works. He thinks science and logic are enough to explain everything. And the film spends every single minute gently, terrifyingly proving him wrong. That idea, that there are things larger and older than our understanding, is not just a horror concept. It is a human one. It is the feeling you get when you stand at the edge of the ocean or look up at the night sky. The world is bigger than we are. It always has been. Jacques Tourneur understood that. Niall McGuinness understood it. And the audiences who sat in dark cinemas in 1957 understood it too, even when they were screaming. This film was made by imperfect people, fighting over creative decisions, working under pressure, doing their best with what they had. And somehow, out of all of that conflict and compromise, they made something that has outlasted almost everything else from its time. That is what movies can do. That is the magic that has nothing to do with runes or demons. The magic of human beings telling stories that keep other human beings awake at night, decade after decade, generation after generation. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we will keep uncovering them, one story at a time.